Hi, I'm John Clark, aviation attorney, and in this video I'm going to help you answer the question, are you really a contract pilot? So answering the question, are you a contract pilot, is actually quite a complex state-by-state legal question. So I just want to remind everyone that this is not legal advice. I'm here for educational purposes, and please read the disclaimer below before we get started. On a daily basis, I talk to lots of professional pilots, aircraft owners and operators, aircraft managers, and other people involved in Part 91 flight operations. And I can say that in over half the cases where contract pilots are involved, they're either working without a contract or they're working with a contract that they pulled off the internet. The one that I've seen that's been floating around on the internet for a long time, I can't really recommend it. It's better than nothing, but really not by much. So I think that it would be worth it to invest a little time and money in getting a correct contract. But we will see in the rest of this video that no matter what you put in the contract, there's still some fundamental tests you need to pass. But first, let's talk about what the risks are here. The risk of misclassifying an employee as a contractor. The bulk of that risk falls on the person who is paying the pilot fees. That is a person who could be subject to back taxes, penalties, and interest. Could also be subject to claims for overtime or vacation pay, etc. Now on the pilot side, you're really just missing out on the type of benefits that an employee would get. Health insurance, workers' comp insurance, unemployment insurance, those types of benefits. Plus the employer's paying half of the payroll taxes that you would have to pay as a self-employed pilot. So I think it's really a business decision for you whether you want to be classified as an employee or a contractor. But now let's get into the tests. Now I'm licensed in California only, and so I want to bring up a California case to talk about. In 2018, the Supreme Court of California issued an opinion and adopted a brand new independent contractor test. This was a case against a same-day courier service in Los Angeles that had converted all of its employees in 2004 to independent contractors, so basically drivers. So you can see that Uber and Lyft are wrestling with this decision right now in California, and I've wondered often, are pilots next? I'm not so sure about that, but we want to go through the test anyway and see how it might affect your pilot services. To be considered an independent contractor, a pilot should pass each part of what is now called the ABC test. A, that the worker is free from the control and direction of the employer in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract for the performance of the work and in fact. B, that the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. And C, that the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature that is involved in the work performed. Let's see if I can summarize the ABC test in plain English. For the A part of the test, you basically want to be free from the control and direction of whoever is paying your pilot fees. And that means both the contract has to reflect that you're not being micromanaged, and the facts of the case have to show that you're not being micromanaged. So if you're the one who's determining how to fly the aircraft and you're not working for another pilot or a flight operations director, etc., then you should be okay on this one. For the B part of the test, you want to make sure that your client is not in the flying business, is not in transportation by air business, so that whatever they're doing is very different from what you're doing, which is piloting. For the C part of the test, really this comes down to, do you work for multiple clients? So make sure that you have an established trade or business, which usually means you run it through some sort of formal process like having an LLC and a checking account, but also that you're holding yourself out to the public to purchase your services, and you are actually in fact flying for multiple aircraft operators. Now let's look at a couple of common pilot scenarios and apply the ABC test. The one that I see most often is the full-time independent contract pilot working for a single aircraft operator, or maybe one aircraft with a couple of related operators. Under test A, we want to find out, is the pilot free from the control and direction of the employer in connection with the performance of the work, both under the contract and in fact. And so these are really two different tests. One is, what is the defined relationship? And in most contracts, that's got some kind of independent contractor clause. It's carefully worded to make sure that you are not an employee. However, when you look at the facts of the matter, the question is the employer involved in directing the contract pilot / chief pilot? I'd say in most cases that is not happening. The pilot really understands what he or she is doing, and the employer is pretty much following along. Looking at test B, that the worker performs work that is outside the usual course of the hiring entity's business. Basically, you're not doing what the employer does. So if you're flying and they're in the construction business or they're in the real estate business, then no problem. I think if you're working for somebody who has a flying service of some type, then you would be getting into a sort of a muddy area. But this is usually not a problem. It's test C where the problem comes up, and that's where the worker is customarily engaged in an independently established trade, occupation, or business of the same nature as that involved in the work performed. And one of the clearest indication is, do you work for more than one aircraft operator? And if you don't, that is going to look much more like an employment situation. So it may be that it's a good idea that you fly for a few contracts for other operators, or the alternative, and this is the best solution, this works in all cases, we'll come back to this at the end of the video, but if you have a Pilot Service LLC set up, if it has elected S-corporation status with the IRS, if you pay yourself a salary and get a W-2, then in that case, it is very clear that you can lease yourselves to one or more employers on a contract basis, and that would really solve the problem all the way around. Now, let's look at scenario number 2. This one's a little more difficult. I see this also very commonly, which is you're functioning as a first officer, a backup captain, you're working part-time underneath a chief pilot or an aircraft manager who is an employee of the aircraft operator. So if this is the case, A is problematic, because are you free from the control and direction of the employer? And the problem is, if the chief pilot is an employee, that pilot represents the company. And if that pilot is supervising you and directing you and talking about crew resource management, setting up your schedules on the flights, you're probably not going to pass test A. Outside the scope of client's usual business, that's once again not really a problem, and working for multiple clients. So it's very common that an independent contractor who fills in for as a backup captain or flies for a bunch of different operators as a second in command, that shouldn't be any problem. Once again, I can give you the same solution. A Pilot Services LLC that elects S-corp status, you pay yourself as a W-2 employee, and then lease yourself out to one or more operators. That works in every case. I actually very rarely see a pilot who has set up the ideal solution that I've talked about in the last two scenarios. What I see most commonly is an LLC and a checking account, and a single member of that LLC is the pilot. So the pilot will accept checks in the name of the LLC, and that's pretty much the extent of the business. It shows up on some contracts, and it shows up with a checking account. This can be okay, but if you have that set up, it's very important that you meet each and every one of the ABC tests. That's critical. Whereas if you've got the proper setup, you don't really need to meet any of them. If your particular situation doesn't match any of those two common scenarios, simply go back and look at the ABC test. Really focus on tests A and C. Are you free from control and direction of the employer, and are you working for multiple clients? If you can't say you're doing those, then you may want to think about sort of reorganizing what you do. As I said, in both those cases, and frankly in every case, if you have an LLC electing S-corp status and paying yourself as a W-2, that's the ideal solution. But the problem is that's a little more advanced, it's a little more involved, and it's a little more costly. I would say budget about an extra $2,000 a year to maintain that type of setup. So if you're just starting out or you're only working occasionally, I think you can go a long way towards meeting your goals, first by just having an LLC and a bank account set up so that your contracts are in the name of a company and the 1099 is not coming in your personal name. That will get you a long ways towards compliance, and if you later want to elect S-corp status, you can as you grow your business. I would say the rule of thumb is once your business is generating over $80,000 a year, you definitely should be electing S-corp status and creating a salary for yourself and reporting that on a W-2 each year for your tax return. Other scenarios I see obviously is just a 1099 in your personal name. If that's the case, probably should be asking the employer, hey, why don't you put me on your payroll? The only trouble is you could set yourself up for an even bigger risk, and I'll discuss this in future videos. But the key is you don't want to be employed by some other subsidiary thrown off that's different from the company that you're flying for, or if you're flying for somebody personally and they're putting you in their company as an employee, those could all actually lead to risks for your pilot license. So we'll talk about that in future videos, but you want to make sure you have the right contracts in place if that comes up. We've covered a lot of information in a short period of time, and I know that these legal issues are not the most interesting. So what do you need to take away? I think there's three things. First, don't lose sleep over this. If you're the pilot, there's not that much to worry about. If you're the one paying the pilot, time to go see a lawyer. Second thing, the facts matter. In fact, the facts are far more important than what you write in some contracts. So you take your facts and you apply the ABC test and see whether it comes out as valid independent contractor or misclassified employee. And last, there are much more important things for you to get as a contract pilot. So for number 3, I think we're going to defer to a lot of the future videos we're going to be doing here, and that is that the business of contract flying has a lot of important issues for you to take care of. If you're trying to manage and grow your own contract pilot business, go ahead and check out preFlite.com or preFlite on Facebook. preFlite is an iPhone app that helps pilots take the hassle out of contract flying. If you got some value out of this video, please let me know by liking or commenting below. If you'd like to see more of these videos discussing contract, aviation, legal, and business questions, hit the subscribe button, and then don't forget, click the bell to get notified as soon as we upload a new video.